Hello, welcome to Put Your Ears On. I'm Bill Mohr. Put Your Ears On is a show which concentrates on Los Angeles poets. Over 30 years ago, in fact, exactly 30 years ago, in November of 1968, George Drury Smith founded Beyond Baroque in Venice, California. It has endured these 3 decades as a wonderful, exceptional center for the literary arts in Southern California, and has become nationally renowned as a place where poets who are not necessarily associated with the university can find room to work, to develop, to grow, and mature. One of the first poets to attend Beyond Baroque's free poetry workshop back in the late 60s and early 70s was Harry Northup. Harry Northup's work attracted attention immediately for its vivid imagery and its intelligent rhythms, which reflected a profound knowledge of the streets and the psyche, what I eventually referred to as the streets inside. Harry Northup has also had an extraordinary career as a professional actor. He has appeared in over 24 films, ranging from Mean Streets to the recent film Beloved. He has worked with directors including such directors as Jonathan Demme and Martin Scorsese. It's a real honor to present Harry Northup tonight, a poet whose work is superb and which continues to develop and grow. He'll be reading new poetry tonight from a manuscript entitled Reunions. Welcome, Harry, to Put Your Ears On.
Well, thank you, Bill. It's good seeing you. I always enjoy talking to you about poetry.
Yeah, we've done that a lot over the years, Harry.
Yeah.
Right. You have a new manuscript here. I know that this is work that you've done since you worked on, since a book came out from Cahuenga Press called The Ragged Vertical.
Right.
And before that, you had a book called The Images We Possess Kill the Capturing. Before that, you had a book called Enough the Great Running Chapel. Sure. So you've had quite a few books of poetry out. Could we hear a few poems from this new manuscript, please?
I'd love to. One thing you mentioned, Beyond Baroque, and I'd just like to add that it has lasted longer than the Women's Building and Schulberg's Watts Writers' Workshop, which are both also important institutions in LA. The first poem from Reunions is Poetry. I finally figured out what poetry is. What is it? It's a loneliness that doesn't go away. Memory laundry. Most times when I do our laundry at Normandy and Sunset at 8:30 a.m., I am reminded of the summer before I turned 13. I worked in a Chinese laundry in my hometown, Sidney, Nebraska, pulling wet, heavy sheets out of huge, long washers. At a break, letting the sweat cool, I sat on the outside step in the back, shady, worked with women. Chinese man owned it. My best friend growing up was Conrad Ribera, who now lives in Reno, has kidney dialysis 3 times weekly. And when I say to my LA friends that I grew up with Mexicans, they say, in Nebraska, Mexicans? They work for the government. They worked in fields, I reply. In those days, they liked to be called Spanish. Mexican was a dirty word, fighting word. My dad worked for the government, Sioux Ordnance Depot. We lived on a housing project, Ordville. Apartments made of cinder blocks, wheat fields on 3 sides. We played baseball most summer mornings, 10 a.m. Art Hernandez, catcher, Jimmy Phillips, pitcher, Joe Butler, first base, Ike Ramos, second, Ferdinand Hernandez, shortstop, Harry E. Northup, third, Richard Kernan, left, David McFadden, center, Isaac Martinez, right, and at times Ron Prue, an Indian caught. Art and Ferd were brothers and both boxers, won Golden Glove championships, turned pro. They and Phillips and Conrad and others, we got into trouble. Several of us drove to Denver, went into a bar. I threw a glass down on the floor, said, "He hit me," started a fight, and Art went outside with a guy I pointed at, and a fight ensued. Last night, I sat under the stars of the Hollywood Bowl with my wife and 2 friends, Al and Steve, felt blessed listening to the Magic Flute by Mozart. This morning, I felt regenerated. The last 4 times I've done the laundry, I've been good, I said to my wife. For the prose turn old, a memory of heavy, wet sheets and work in a Chinese laundry in a small town in western Nebraska never leaves me. Home. For the purpose of love, a place, shelter, warmth, food, nourishing nature. For my second oldest brother and wife, come tomorrow night for dinner. My son will be with us. Maybe we could drive up to the observatory after we eat. That's a good idea, for she comforts me. Lately, my son has been confiding in her. Today, I drew a picture of my home in Sydney, 58, 57, senior year in high school, diagonal Burlington tracks behind 701 Maple till my parents died. My mother and I slept in the same bedroom till I went away to the Navy. She had many pressed flower dresses in the closet, a dresser between us. For she was punctual, honest, thorough in her duties as a postmistress, drove 12 miles to SOD through snow, rain. For this wooden floor has grace also. My wife has cooked and fed, cleaned, taught, nourished, paid attention to nature, internal, external. Moon, Pearl, Hearing Aid, Diamond, Corvair, Studebaker, Plymouth, Buick. Journal, Community, Affection, Writing, Datsun 510 Original, Geo Prism. We ate halibut, rice, green beans. I love seeing the word seafood on restaurants in Nebraska, fried shrimp, halibut, perch. For thine has come unto me, and I say, welcome, my brother and sister-in-law, into our home for food and sharing. Mariposa, Mundy, East Hollywood, Nebraska, California, Japan. My wife cooks, and I clean up.
How long have you lived in East Hollywood, Harry?
I moved to East Hollywood in 1985. I'd been living in West Hollywood, and then moved in there in 85, and then my wife and I got married in 90. So I've been there for 13 years, which is the longest I've ever lived in one place.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. You hardly hear any references to East Hollywood. Your poetry, in fact, is one of the few places where that sort of sense of identity has ever appeared that I can think of. Is it formally, that area formally called East Hollywood, or do
well,
you...
I think it's informally.
It's informally,
yeah.
So it's sort of known among the people who create the community as that, self-titled.
Yeah. One person did a review of The Ragged Vertical on the internet, and she said he's one of the few people that admits to living in East Hollywood. And
that have what?
One of the few people who actually admits to living in East Hollywood.
There, right.
And the next day after I'd read the review, I was walking down in East Hollywood, and I saw a bluebird fly up in the air, and I thought, hey, you can see beauty no matter where you are. Yeah. I mean, I don't, I'm where I am because it's a good place, and it's a multi-ethnic neighborhood, and it's a nice place to live.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Liberty Scrolls. I am more and more like my father. He read, he looked to an inner peace. There was never any question, debate. He was leading the ship with wife. For so begotten was the morning kitchen table, wasted in the stream light, like I am in the tub, not yet 10 a.m. Feel good about yourself, a friend says, after I had been going on about learning humility, for thine is the kingdom in the wild. For whosoever looks at himself in the mirror, Northup, you good-looking son of a bitch. Motel room, he wears an Hawaiian shirt. And now my son goes to AA, and I continue to write about father/son. Yet AA states anonymity. But I am drawn again and again to my birth, Amarillo, and then we moved many times in the Midwest. Better job open, another government base. My dad worked all his life. He lied about his age and joined the Navy at 14. After discharge, joined the Army. Even on his gravestone, it says 1900 instead of 1902. It brings me my tears back to the cornfields, wheat, hills, rocks, fences, farms, baseball, lying, fighting, studying, playing basketball, learning to drive in a 1949 maroon two-door Plymouth, age 12, Manzanola, Colorado. One night at a family reunion in Aurora, my three brothers, sister, and spouses and I told sayings of my dad all night. Human, flawed, angry, humorous, work, driving, cross-country. 20 years now, and he's dead. My mother and dad are buried in Greenwood Cemetery, Sidney, Nebraska. He worked hard, loved his family, drank, played cribbage, fathered 4 boys, one girl. I bend my heart into your light. Why I live. This poem is for the greedy materialists. While one dwells in quantity, I dwell in writing and reading poetry. It is a regular devotion. As holy as the gray and white cat I hold and pet. Beatific as jacaranda petals surrounding, showering, consuming a rooftop, fleeing cars' feet. I read, I write in night's middle, while one hawks talent to mammon, to extol a house and external pride, to say, this is me, I am a big thing outside myself, I am big and important like the middle class. My contribution is small like a foot. Referring also to the variable foot of William Carlos Williams. Holy thing. 4 white feet, white belly, white ruff, pink soles, nose, mouth, white mouth, lower cheeks, nose, and center forehead, gray predominant above and around, down legs. His body breathes. His feet and mouth twitch. An occasional car goes by on Mariposa, 3:15 a.m. His pink tongue slightly sticks out. He stretches. His fur windy even in sleep. As you mentioned, I worked in Beloved. I've worked for Jonathan Demme 9 times, and he hired me to play the sheriff in Beloved, and I had to relearn to ride. I hadn't ridden a horse for 25 years, so I rode 19 times before I went to do the movie. I had 7 lessons.
Where did you practice riding?
I found a woman out in Sunland, and she had several horses, so I rode several different horses, and I get up real early in the morning, and then I rode up at the top of Beechwood. There's a place called Sunset Ranch. Old. I do not know if I will ever be able to fulfill my challenge, to be able to speed ride and dismount. Good cantering, good form, good dismounting. I never know which trail. You're a horse poet. When I was little, I slept in the horse trough to be near my horse. Down the dirt alley, to a paved road, to the highway, slow, careful cross through a narrow opening, earth area over rocky place, down hills, cross ponds, fast ups, walking, trotting. You ride good, you just have to ride as much as you can. We crossed paths with 2 young Hispanic gang guys, girl, muzzled, pit bull, going into the brush. A coyote, 3 jackrabbits, punk hermit, washing shirt in pond. 2 women riders, one on a national show horse, one on a black pony, going opposite ways. Move black cattle back, move his rear away from the pony. Some horses don't like ponies and might kick. It's etiquette to give way. The trotting of black cattle, quarter horse shook me up like a milkshake, 2 raw marks several inches long, the top of my rear. Sit straight, move into the canter. And this last poem from this manuscript is called Wrapped. It was written 10/7/97. When I was in Philly, staying at the Warwick, shooting Beloved, I would wake at 4, go to Little Pete's for juice and coffee. Once, 3 nights in a row, I ate a cheesesteak. 4 nights, I ate at fine restaurants. The best, roasted lobster and seafood risotto, like a pudding in the center with seafood broth around it. Demme has hired me to come to Fayetteville, Arkansas, Marysville, California, Pittsburgh, Philly twice. He always asks, how are Dylan and Holly? Jonathan returned to the book for source info, guidance. Toni Morrison blessed the script. There's magic realism, a poetic sensibility in her book. I call it spiritual realism. She's better than Malcolm X because Malcolm X pointed a finger, placed blame. She tells a story. She demolishes myths. Albert Hall, stamp paid, said. We sat on the porch, in between shots. We looked at the haystacks, tall trees, wagons, horses. We discussed Toni Morrison's writing. Our voices quiet, resonant.
Well, you started out wanting to be an actor. That was your first dream,
Right.
And you did stage acting for a number of years in New York, and then came to California and Los Angeles to find work in Hollywood, which you have, and you've also worked on films like Taxi Driver and Silence of the Lambs. Is there a particular role, Harry, that you look back on and with fondness? I don't think I've ever talked to you about that, as in terms of asking you if you had a favorite, a particular one that you liked, that you enjoyed as an actor, where there was a challenge and you met it in a particular way.
Well, the picture that my best part was Over the Edge. I played the lead in it. I got top billing, and Jonathan Kaplan, he directed that. And when we were doing Bad Girls, I told him, I said, "You gave me the best part I ever did." And he says, "I know I did." But the one thing about another film that I worked on, Mean Streets, there's something about that when I did that picture, it was such a violent picture, and I love Scorsese's films, it almost dislodged something in my psyche that led me in almost to violence. So that was important to me too, on that level.
Did that influence any of the poems you were working on at the time?
I think it did, yeah.
Well, was that before or after you wrote a poem such as "I Cut My Mind Open in an Esso Station"?
That was that was. I think "I Cut My Open in an Esso Station" was the spring of '74, and I did Mean Streets in the fall of '73. So it did affect me.
Yeah. So there was a direct correlation.
Yeah.
I remember that was one of the early poems. I mean, you'd been at Beyond Baroque for about 4 years by that point. But that was a poem that I published in Momentum magazine, and I remember a number of people remarking on the power of that poem. Also how it tied in with the ghazal form of poetry. I remember the way that the couplets worked, and they were like ghazals, and not many people at that point were working with that particular form. You were ahead of your time, as you often are, Harry, with that.
Well, I'd also been studying a lot of 17th century poetry, which I love, and there's a lot of couplets in there. And so that, I think, that underneath had a lot of strength for me too.
Right. Yeah. I think one of the things that we've done as a community of poets who don't have any formal classroom outside of this workshop that we sort of all decide to attend, is that we talk about poetry in terms of the books that we read. Are there any books that you remember people talking about back then that influenced your work?
Well,
that
I know,
surprised you in terms of their recommendation?
I know you and I one time, we spent some time talking about Hart Crane's The Bridge. I always loved him. He was such a, he would get out there, he wrote a lot of those poems in 1926. And that was important to me. I think for me, the 17th century poets, I really wasn't, I was reading them formally, but Paul Blackburn and Anne Stanford, their poetry, and Leland Hickman, whom you published, he was important to me in terms of just going the distance, do it to death, through to the bone.
Right.
Because I remember the poem you mentioned, "I Cut My Mind Open in an Essay Station," which is about an 8-page poem. I wrote the first poem, and I took it over to Lee's house, who was living on Gardner in Hollywood, and showed it to me. He said, "Oh, there's a lot more there." So I went home and, wrote some more. And so it's nice to be around people that can see what's, the mystery, right, and what potentially is there, because, we admire that aspect too of being able to go as much as we can, as full as we can.
Right, right. Yeah, it's interesting you should mention Lee, of course, living on Gardner there, because in fact, the reason he was living in Gardner or living in Los Angeles, he was living here with Charles Macaulay, who was a film actor. So even many of the poets who are here even obliquely live here, in a sense related to the film industry, if only as finding companions in that industry. You have some poems that you've told me you'd like to read from the Ragged Vertical, which is your most recent full-length collection from Cahuenga Press, which is a wonderful cooperative of poets. Another way in which the poets in this town have decided to force the issue of legitimacy and self-affirmation and presence as poets in a city that sometimes is very indifferent to them. You formed your own press and put out a number of gorgeous books, including Holly Prado's Pacific Mysteries, as well as Phoebe McAdams' book, Cecilia Wallach, Jim Cushing. And so it's a rather extraordinary collection of poets and books. Why don't you talk a little bit about the Ragged Vertical and read a few poems from it?
Well, the Ragged Vertical is poems written from 1975 through 1991. And it's actually 6 books, 6 works. And the themes in it are father-son relationship, work or not working as an actor, poetics, and I have some poems in there to my teacher, Ann Stanford. I have a couple of poems for Lee Hickman, who turned me on to poetry. And it has to do with community, as you mentioned. And I have always thought that it's important to have a community of poetry, of poets, so that each poet could go further. Have that underpinning of, care. Because it's rare, right? In this town, everybody's going for the money. And poetry, we go for learning and trying to extend the tradition and fulfill our gift and keep trying to, improve ourselves, right? And learn as much as we can.
Yeah. It's interesting that you think about poetry as learning when we also emphasize the senses. So I think one of the things that's very attractive about poetry is it's the most sensual art in terms of being didactic.
That's right.
It's a pure sound experience.
That's right.
Well, read a poem from the Ragged Vertical.
There are moments of sheer brilliant love for my wife Holly Prado, a luminous poet. There are moments of sheer brilliant love when the lovemaking is good and the consideration for another makes all bad thoughts fade. Even time is suspended like in a good story well told. For to keep feeling like a bird, sensitive to external winds, walkings by phonings. The loss for me is always to be no longer connected to words. To work, to love, and harmony being boundary enough for God's protected seemed to flourish its dead discursiveness. The lovemaking was good, and the jazz that preceded it also, a sensual cleanliness. The excitement of being out in the city rich with its exotic wildness. The cart of flowers she gave me, its elusive appetite and understanding there are fields, dreams that I stand no nearer to than on the other side of a closed door. The food attractive and fresh and wholesome, its firmness, its tenderness. The brown train goes under a green underpass, gray smoke, blue train, gray smoke, white sky, when there is no need to transcend her body. For the coldness and the clean and the white, the heart-shaped moon desire listening to what pulls on the inner lucidity. Making love is for me a green pleasure. The last word Eve says in Paradise Lost is restore. The food she cooks and the places and times she cleans, to restore love to gold to hold its honor, even among similes, its thieves like a knight, renters, wholesalers, designs, configurations, oval departures, trees, beaks, stories, once all changed unto a committed honor. To moderate a seeking, wherein boy, where woman, a man serves in order to achieve an equal. For the hiding seemed to be killed a constant. There are moments of sheer brilliant love. Her skirts black, her skirts gray, blue and pink she has in her hand. It is in a home where there is love. And if simplicity in home and two and three, a woman placed for the man, for the boy. The flowers she gave to me were dragged from me in order to clear time for the life. For there is time for happiness, and this is such a time. There is love, and there is also damage. We have been all our dreams a waking. She has the understanding. Love itself is a happy. He understands. He has also hurt her, and he loves her, for hope restores.
Thank you, Harry. A marvelous poem.
Oh, thank you. You've published me in the past, and you published two of my books, Arrows Ash and Enough the Great One in Chapel. So I always told you right up there, as high as one can, right up there with Scorsese and Jonathan Demme and Jonathan Kaplan, and Lee Hickman and Ann Stanford. There's a few people that have been good to me, and I'm honored to be here with you today. Absolute. I went over and kissed the cat on the lips. She tried to bite me on the lips. My wife is in Morro Bay. Night, I hear the clock. I miss her face and her hair, her belly, legs, breasts, neck, hands, lips and tongue, and our cheeks against. The beautiful men and women on the bus, sleeping, smiling, sharing kindness, red shoes and gold chain around an ankle, short gold skirt, Hispanics, African Americans, young Anglo with a skateboard, his baseball cap on backwards, moving through the bus, moving through the city on a bus. Since this is a city, and I grew up in Nebraska, maybe I'll just read this instead of that other poem that I was thinking about. Here's a short little piece called Sign. Sign, a long crucifix being hoisted up, a man on it, tied, white skeleton dancing in the dark. Neon horns in a circle, 6, cream light, twirling. A man on a horse, riding past a cactus, the sun setting. A face with a mask, cowboy hat, the pointed finger, eyes, holes of light. A round face and the inner circles closing. a still man with a white mustache, cowboy hat, many stars encircling him, going back home, a thin cowpoke, stars above, dark blue sky.
Thank you, Harry.
Thank you.
Yes. I'm Bill Mohr. This has been Put Your Ears On. Today's guest was Harry Northup, a wonderful poet of unusual clarity and I think a sense of learning, that of taking the love and damage that happens in life and learning from it and sharing that learning in his poems. It's been a real honor to have you on the show today, Harry, and I look forward to doing another show with you sometime.
Oh, thank you.
All right. This has been Bill Mohr with Put Your Ears On. Thanks very much for listening. Good evening.